rates of depression for Americans tripled, and they have not gone down ever since. In addition, we continue to see rates of suicide go up. Anxiety is a huge issue. And this is something that's showing up in every workplace. So there are studies showing that 80% of U.S. workers are reporting that they're burned out.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Evolving Your Workplace. I'm Carol Schultz. So today I have a favor to ask. If you aren't already following us on Spotify, now's the perfect time so you stay alerted with each and every new episode. Today, a colleague of mine and I are going to discuss the causes and solutions of poor mental health in the workplace and what you can do as a leader to foster well-being. Regardless of the industry, mental health remains an important factor in a company's success, yet one that's really under-discussed. Small aspects such as strict sick leave policies and extreme work hours can impact worker well-being over time, leading to serious mental health issues. So, should a company react on the individual or organizational scale? And here with me to discuss this really important subject is Laura Putnam, CEO of Motion Infusion. Laura, thanks for joining us. And if you could first tell us a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. I am, as you said, CEO and founder of Motion Infusion, author of Workplace Wellness That Works, and also more recently co-founder of another organization that is solely focused on empowering and equipping managers to lead wellness, culture, and be more effective leaders in the workplace. And this managers has really been a primary focus of mine over the past 2 decades of my work in the workplace well-being space.
When you talk about well-being, how do you define that?
I like to define things in simple terms that we can all understand. And so my way of defining it is really each of us manifesting our version of me at my best, whatever that looks like. So me at my best for me is when I'm channeling my inner gymnast. I was actually a Division I gymnast doing a handstand on a bluff overlooking Golden Gate Bridge, or when I'm with people I love, or when I'm doing great work. And while we each have a different definition of what me at my best looks like, there are universal themes that apply to all of us. So in order to be well, we need physical well-being, we need emotional well-being, social well-being, financial well-being, career well-being, community well-being. So that in a nutshell is really what well-being is.
Got it. Love that. So what are some of the warning signs in the workplace of poor mental health? What do you think?
Where do we begin?
Where do you start, right?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, we might call the mental health crisis the second wave of the pandemic, which is we have recovered on a physical level from the pandemic, but we have not recovered on an emotional and mental level. So during the pandemic, rates of depression for Americans tripled, and they have not gone down ever since. In addition, we continue to see rates of suicide go up. Anxiety is a huge issue. And this is something that's showing up in every workplace. So there are studies showing that 80% of U.S. workers are reporting that they're burned out. 1 in 4 employees is seriously mentally distressed. And this is impacting people on all levels, from frontline workers to top CEOs.
Yeah, this is such an important subject. And, my former co-host when I was running my after hours part of the podcast, and I talked a good bit about this. But, given where we are now with the global economy, our current political divisiveness and other things, I think this is such an important thing to be talking about again. When I think about mental wellness, of course, I think about my own mental wellness. And then, of course, I have clients and I see the mental wellness of their employees, right? And when you talk about and give that definition of what well-being means to each of us, and that's something that's different to each of us, right? For me, for example, that was, instead of, today's my gym day off, Wednesdays is my gym day off, I get to, in the wintertime, at least stay in bed with my laptop and drink a coffee. This time of year, however, I'm usually out of the house between 6 and 6:30. So the same as when I go to the gym. It's not like I'm sleeping in, but, and I go out and play with some horses. Right. Yes. And this morning I worked with my 2 and 3-year-old, and then came back and got to work. But, it's different for everybody. And I think the other thing that's worth talking about is that each person has a different level of what they can manage from a mental health standpoint, right? I have an employee of one of my clients right now who is almost perpetually either threatening to quit. The most recent thing is maybe I should just go work half-time. And I said to the CEO, I think the next time this person says this, we need to say, okay, great. How do we make that happen for you? I said, because really what this person is doing is bending him over. And that's not a healthy workplace, frankly, from a cultural standpoint, right?
Yeah. And I think that there are individual cases of people who are perhaps taking advantage of the system and, calling it a mental health issue. However, if we look at the broader statistics, we know that broadly speaking, so many of us are struggling with our mental health. And we know that this level of mental distress is impacting every organization on every level. And it is particularly impacting industries like the construction industry, which has the second highest rate of suicide of any industry, second only to veterans. So while we have up to this point largely framed up addressing mental distress as a matter of fortifying individuals with tools and resources and better mindset and being more resilient, what the research overwhelmingly suggests is that the broad rise in mental distress has less to do with the individual and more to do with the workplace itself. So this is according to institutes like the McKinsey Health Research Institute, finding that this was a 15-country study, and they found that over 70% of organizational leaders identified the rise in mental distress, employee mental distress, as a top organizational priority. They have put forth thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, toward these employee resources, only to have little to no impact. And this is something that we see over and over again in these well-intended wellness and mental health programs. And the researchers in this case, they concluded that these organizations are effectively solving for the wrong problem. That is, they're solving for the individual as opposed to addressing the systemic issues. So to translate this in more everyday speak, no yoga class, as wonderful as they are, I love yoga, no mindfulness app, no employee assistance program can make up for having to do the work of 3, which is something that we're seeing in so many organizations, or having to work with a toxic boss, or having to work in an organization that has unfair systems in place, or have low levels of perceived organizational support. So if an organization actually wants to move the needle on this prevalent issue of employee mental distress, they have to begin looking at this from a more systemic perspective.
For me, and certainly not for you, and for many others that are listening, this is not an aha moment, okay? Because, as I have said ad nauseum, people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? So when you talk about the toxic workplace culture or other issues and just horrible leadership, right? And there's, I would say, more bad leadership than there is good leadership in this country. And, we could define what bad leadership looks like. It's, many different things, how you speak to your people. And again, nothing can replace somebody doing, 2 or 3 people's job, one person, right? All the classes in the world are not going to fix that problem. So, I think that, one of the questions is, what can a leader who is listening to this and who's now realizing that they may be creating this environment, right? What do they do to turn around their culture? I mean, I have my own ideas, but I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah. I mean, there's really, 2 levels of leadership we're talking about. On the one hand, we have the top leadership that they're the ones who set policies. They are also the ones who allocate resources. And then we have the middle managers, the team leaders. So what we know is, and this is according to a 19-country study conducted by ADP Research Institute, is that the culture that people experience when they are at work is largely the culture that they experience within their team. And so therefore, whether or not culture and well-being and mental health is part of a manager's job description, they are the ones who are in fact uniquely positioned to make or break the culture and the extent to which the people in their team can be well. And according to long-standing research from Gallup, we know that 70% of people's variance in their engagement with their work and their well-being really can be linked to the manager. Now, I also want to say, though, that top leaders really have a role to play as well, in that they need to be investing the resources into supporting managers so that they can effectively lead. And what we know, based on the most recent report on engagement released by Gallup, is that for the second year in a row, managers showed the biggest drop in rates of engagement of any demographic. And over 50% of managers are reporting that they receive zero training from their organization on how to lead. So how can I am a big believer, especially as a former teacher, former high school, I'm a big believer that we can all learn and that we can all be transformed into great leaders through effective training programs. Of course. And along with, organizational systems and policies that enable managers to really do their work well. So it's really both.
And this, by the way, is another thing that I have talked about ad nauseum, right? The fact that, I mean, and this is a problem. I have had so many people tell me that the first things their companies have cut back is any kind of training or development, if they even have it at all, right? Going back to my old co-host, he and I both have told stories about our first management role when we were just, kids, basically in our 30s, right? Or our late 20s. And how we were thrown into a management role because we were star individual contributors, right? There's people out there that are listening to this going, yeah, that was me. I was in that same situation, right? And got exactly zero training. But I'll tell you, when it came time for my bosses to bust my stones and criticize me and lambaste me for being a shitty manager, they were sure right front and center to tell me that. But they never did anything to train me on how to be a great leader. Never, not a thing.
I mean, this is a dynamic that Gallup certainly has been.
Who needs Gallup to even tell us that?
I know.
Anybody who's been around long enough knows this, because so many of us have experienced it personally.
Absolutely. So you're really good technically, you're a high performer. Yeah. So you're promoted as a manager and then suddenly expected to be able to perform well on a whole set of skills that you've never been trained on.
That's right. Yeah. I just, and companies so often, and it's just, really sad to see, they're like, well, gosh, we have to cut back somewhere. Well, let's just cut this back. And I'm thinking, now you do realize that the costs that are going to be around that are considerably higher than not cutting this, right? Exactly. So let's really look at where you're spending your money. There probably are some cuts you can make, but let's look at where you're spending your money, how you're spending your money, and is there somewhere where we can cut back a little bit there without doing any damage?
Absolutely. And
it's not a 1 or a 0.
Right. And returning to the issue of well-being and mental health, so many organizations will say, oh gosh, we need to do this wellness thing. We need to do this mental health thing. And it goes straight to HR, and they're like, HR, find us some kind of an app or platform that we can use. And it's solving for the wrong problem. So that's a great example of misspent, scarce resources. So a better place to allocate those resources is to really think about how do we shape our leaders, particularly our team leaders so that they can elevate well-being within the team, so that they're inspired to do so, so that they're educated on how to do so, so they're equipped to do so with the tools. And that is exactly the work that I've been doing now since 2012, which is really helping managers to understand, why does well-being matter? And mental health matter. So you give me any metric that matters to your organization, whether it's profitability or retention or attraction or safety on the job, and I'll show you how it ties to well-being and mental health. And then secondly, why is it not enough to just have a standalone wellness program? Why do managers really need to be leading it? And why does it need to be incorporated into the way the work gets done? And then what do they do moving forward? And the calls to action, which are outlined in my multiplier method that I've been using and that is evidence-based. It's been tested by a third party and cited by organizations like the Mayo Clinic as to the evidence that managers really can make a difference, is very simple. Do, speak, create. So lead by example. I call this, I want to see my boss in spandex.
Model the behavior. Yep.
Speak. Talk about it in a meaningful and human way, and then create, which is devise systems within the team that normalize the pursuit of well-being. And it's things like, thinking about things like psychological safety. We know psychological safety is so critical, particularly in a challenging world that we're in right now. Well, it's really fascinating. The highest predictor of psychological safety within a team is actually shared airtime. So when you have a couple of people on a team who are always dominating the airspace and other people's voices never get heard, then that team most likely has low levels of psychological safety. So here's a really easy system as a manager that you can implement, which is to just track how the airtime is divided amongst the team members, and really, implement systems to make sure that that is spread across equitably.
Yeah, that's interesting because, when you talk about psychological safety, that's something I talk about in my communication talk, right? I have a communication talk that I do. And, but it is at the base or at the heart of the culture of feedback that I help my clients build, right? And those people that are not getting the airtime, as you call it, maybe because there's not a true culture of feedback in the company.
Right.
And it's not being modeled effectively by the CEO who has to model it first and foremost. And then throughout the rest of their organization, throughout the team below them to model it for their own people. Right. And it has to take time. And the importance of listening, right? Intentional listening, not hearing, intentional listening of those managers who go to these people and say, hey, let's talk for 15 minutes. Tell me what's on your mind. What's working? What's not working? I want to hear this because we can't change anything if we don't know.
And one of my favorite examples of a very simple system that every manager can implement that can make an enormous difference on performance and psychological safety is to set aside time every week to meet individually with each team member and ask them two simple questions. What are you working on and how can I help?
Yes.
And I had seen this over and over again with managers and leaders who've implemented this. And when they do, they say, you cannot believe the difference in the level of trust in my team. And furthermore, my team members are now bringing it to their teams. But, back to what these top leaders can do, one of my favorite examples is what Douglas Conant did, who was brought in as the CEO of Campbell's to turn around a failing company. And the thing that he did on day one is that he committed, in his words, to being tough on standards and tender-hearted with people. And the way he went about doing this was by focusing on the daily touch points. So thinking about in every single touch point that he had with every individual across the organization, that he would leverage that moment as an opportunity to lift that person up. And so he modeled that. And furthermore, he set the expectation across the organization that this is how every leader should lead. And one of his best practices is that he set aside time every single day to write handwritten thank you notes. It's estimated that during his time, he wrote over 30,000 of these. And so over this 8-year tenure, this company went from being an underperforming company to outperforming the S&P and racking up all kinds of awards and best place to work. So it really models the difference that it can make when leaders really start to pay attention to these nuances.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And I think that often what happens is, and I'm not even so sure if it's that, the leader in question is just a bad leader, or they're just thinking, I am so overwhelmed. I just don't know where I'm going to find time to do this.
Yeah. I mean, a recent former CEO of a large brokerage firm, Scott McGowan, he talked in a podcast interview he had with me. He talked a lot about how, like, he's constantly talking with leaders about, like, you've got to love your people. The work will get done. You have to put your focus on creating a culture of love, literally. Culture of love. And when people feel like that they are in a culture of love, which I got to experience firsthand when I went to speak at this organization. I mean, I walked into a culture of love, and people, when they love the work that they do, when they love the people that they are with, they become unstoppable. And that's really the work that lies before us if we want to meaningfully elevate well-being and mental health.
Yeah, I think that's another really important thing to look at is that, that there so often people have thought that, a CEO showing emotion or a leader showing emotion and being vulnerable is a weakness, when really it's, I think, in my opinion, it's a strength to be able to show that vulnerability and to show that you care, right? Because, life is hard. Right.
Well, it's really interesting. The most recent report on leadership issued by Gallup found that the top 4 things that people want from their leaders right now are number 4 is actually stability. People want stability. Number 3 is compassion. Number 2 is trust. And number 1, which I love, is hope. People want hope. And all of those kinds of feelings really come from leaders demonstrating vulnerability. People need to see that vulnerability. And I think that so many leaders feel like that they have to demonstrate competency at all times. They can't reveal any kind of weakness, just as you're talking about. They have to have all the answers, for example, as opposed to asking good questions. And they have to be the one who keeps it all together, as opposed to showing, hey, I'm struggling too. And when they show that kind of vulnerability, it really allows for, I mean, that's the most powerful thing that any leader can do to reduce stigma, which we know is such a huge barrier to people really getting the help that they need.
Right. And to your point, I don't remember exactly how you put it, but the importance of, you said loving your people. And, here's how I look at that, is that, years ago when I was still headhunting full time, I often had candidates say to me, Carol, I've told you things I've never told a recruiter before. And I would always thank them, because it's a lovely acknowledgement to hear from somebody when they say that, because people generally hate recruiters. I mean, often, because they're manipulative. There's always a question in order to get information to use against them or something like that. Right. And after thanking them for that acknowledgement, my response was always, well, here's why you feel that way. You feel that way because I'm actually genuinely interested in people. And when you have a genuine and authentic interest in people, open up to you and you can have a conversation. Because, in the 30 years that I did that, it doesn't benefit me to find somebody who's not a great cultural fit with somebody, because the reality is that over half of employees leave a job in the first 18 months for reasons having nothing to do with their skills and abilities. It's a cultural fit. Something's just not right. And by spending the inordinate amount of time that I did with candidates before ever deciding to present them to my clients, I would always have at least 3 phone calls before I would determine if I was going to present them. And I'm not talking 3 15-minute calls. I'm talking about each call would go from 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer, as we got in more in depth in the conversations. Because that is just, in my opinion, far more important than the skills and abilities. It's going to be the reason they're going to leave the company if there's not a fit there, right? So,
well, the cultural fit and feeling supported by their manager.
of course.
Absolutely. And what I love about what you're describing is that there's a roadmap to that. I mean, there's no mystery to this. And again, this is something that can be learned, can be acquired by anyone as long as they see the value in it, and then they're given the tools to actually be able to adopt it themselves.
Yeah. If I'm just going to kind of want to pivot over here a little bit to your business. You left teaching and, you started your business about 18 years ago. Has what you sell, has how you sell it changed since starting the company?
100%. Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I first started, my focus was really on how do we bring movement into the workplace.
Like
thus
physical movement.
Okay. And I still believe in the power of movement. I mean, one of my favorite studies is a study out of University of Sapienza in Rome, in which they found that when we move together, it actually primes our brains to connect with one another. And I find this particularly interesting with men. Men, in these industries like construction, like I was talking about, where they're male dominated, men actually spend a lot of their time in side-by-side interactions, playing sports together, sitting at a bar together.
Yeah.
And what's great about moving together, like in a silly little walking meeting, for example, is that men are then, and this is true for anybody, we're placed side by side. And when we're walking side by side, when we're moving side by side, it actually helps to build more trust. But then the actual physical movement actually releases neurochemicals in our brain that make us connect with one another. But, so that's where I started. But then I started to move more into kind of broader behavior change. And then ultimately I realized, this is really less about behavior change on an individual. This is less about tips and tricks to the individual about how they can become more resilient, how they can become healthier and happier, how they can adopt better habits, and more about simply changing the water around them. So you put a healthy fish in unhealthy water, they will become less healthy. Conversely, you put an unhealthy fish in healthy water, and they're going to become a whole lot healthier. Sure. And we keep putting all our effort on that damn fish, and that fish is exhausted. And instead, if we were to just put our effort around changing the water, we could do so much more for people's mental health, for their well-being, and for an organization's capacity to thrive and to have high levels of performance. Full stop. So that's really where my work is now, is like, stop fixing people, fix the workplace. It's the water, not the fish. And here's how you change the water.
Well, and it's funny, the example I gave you of the employee who's, perpetually threatening to either quit or go to part-time or whatever. In my initial discovery meeting with this individual, told me that she felt that the workplace was unprofessional, but also told me that I wasn't allowed to divulge that to any of her coworkers, which has made my job hard.
So she wants to complain about it, but she doesn't want to actually work on fixing it.
Right. And, oh, by the way, she doesn't, and I made it very clear to her, listen, I'm, the CEO's brought me in as an organizational strategist to do all these things. And my expectation is the unprofessional piece I'm going to fix along the way. It's going to happen for you. But I want you to know that, part of what I do, I'm a trained executive coach. Use me for that. Okay. I've been at that for 27 years. She has not taken me up on that, doesn't really want to talk to me. And I'm like, to your point, the teacher's only as good as the student, right? If the student is unwilling to put the effort in, and that's why I told the CEO, it's time the next time that this happens to say, good, let's find out the best way to exit you from here. Because it sounds like that's really what you want.
It is an interesting kind of conversation around, is it about an ill-fitting individual that really just, we can only lead a horse to water, but ultimately the
That's
horse
right.
has
And I
to.
have horses. I can attest that that is a truth.
Right. And I can certainly, I saw that certainly day in and day out as a high school teacher, an urban public high school teacher
Yes.
at schools. And I see it now in the organizations and the leaders that I work with. That said, though, it is amazing what can happen even with resistant individuals when we change the environment and the culture in a way that moves them that they might not have been moved
right
before. So, great example of this. I was traveling for work. I was at the DFW airport. I was sitting at Chili's and a woman at the bar, and a woman came and sat beside me, and we did the, what do you do thing. And she was an executive at Wells Fargo, and I shared with her what I did. And when I told her that I worked in workplace well-being, she kind of sighed. She was like, oh. And then she said, I tried that walking meeting thing with my one-on-ones. And she said, it was really interesting. First of all, everybody wanted to do something different. Some of my people were like, want to go on a hardcore 5-mile walk, power walk. Others would be like, just pick a bench and let's just sit outside.
Yeah.
But she said, I had been trying to get these individual team members to be receptive to coaching from me. So exactly what you're describing right now. And every single one of them was resistant to it. And I didn't want to provide it for them unless they asked for it. And she said the most amazing thing happened. After I started doing these, what I thought were silly walking meetings, every single one of my team members came to me on their own accord, and they said, that coaching that you were offering, I think I'm ready. I'd like to get that coaching now.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. You cannot walk through a door that is not open for you. And that's what I always say. It's, the example I give is, remember when you were a kid and, one of your parents started to give you advice that you did not ask for. How often did you really listen to it?
Right. Yeah.
Like never, almost never. Right. So, once someone opens that door, then you get to walk through that door because they've opened it and given you permission. And that's partly what, I don't want to get on a whole tangent about coaching, but, most people who say they're coaches aren't actually coaches because they have no training. They don't actually understand how coaching really works. They are more advisors than coaches. And, but either way, I am used to asking people permission. Can I offer a suggestion? May I offer you some coaching? May I ask you some more questions? Because if they don't open the door, I'm not willing to walk through it. It's a waste of my time, frankly.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there are some best practices in being an effective coach. And I think that this is a role that every manager needs to be prepared to take on. Every manager needs to be trained on how to be a coach, how to be a teacher, and how to be a friend.
Yeah.
And, it's really interesting. I've worked now with over 50,000 managers and leaders through these trainings. And the stat that gets more pushback, more than any other, is the Gallup Q12 stat. If you have, do you have a best friend at work? If you do, you are 7 times more likely to be highly engaged in your work. So I tell these managers, it is your job to foster, A, to become friends with the people that you work with, and B, to foster not just good friendships, but best friendships within the team. And when you do, that is opening the door to higher levels of engagement, higher levels of productivity, higher levels of performance.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I'd say the only caveat I would throw in there, Laura, is that one should be careful in building those best friendships because sometimes who you think might be your friend is not. And I know this from personal experience. Ask me how I know. Right.
Okay,
So I am a huge advocate of if you want to have friends at work, really go for it. But be careful about divulging personal things until you really know that that person's going to keep your confidence. I hate to even have to say that, but I have to say
think
that.
that's smart and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
But also, clearly, that person wasn't a real friend.
Well, obviously.
Yeah. So it's like, how do we foster friendships in the workplace, given that it's a high stakes environment many times? Yes. And so how do we successfully forge these friendships? Because what the research overwhelmingly shows, and what we all know anecdotally, is that when we do have a true friend,
yes,
as opposed to one that we think is a friend but actually isn't a friend, that's when we do our best work.
Yeah, I would agree. So that's I'm glad to hear that distinction, because that's really what the distinction is. So is there anything that we have not talked about today that we missed talking about when it comes to well-being, mental health in the workplace, all the other interesting things that we talked about today?
I mean, I think the first thing is just that well-being and mental health at work is such a good idea. And I mean, we are human beings after all. Let's not forget that.
That we are. Yeah.
And we all have a need for human kinds of things that make us well, like civility. We all need stability. We need sustainability. We need not just belonging, we need significance. We need to feel like we actually matter. And that the work that we do matters. And we all need to feel a sense of hope and sense of trust at work. And I think that these feel soft and ephemeral, but what we know is that every single one of these translate into bottom line objectives, and they translate into having a winning team. And so while this might feel like, hey, this isn't for me, this well-being stuff, and oh, by the way, it doesn't work anyway, my response to that is, okay, yes, it does. Just because the way we've been doing it by and large doesn't work, doesn't mean that it can't work. Right. And there are clear practices such as doubling down on our leaders, particularly our team leaders, and showing them why it matters and how they can lead the way forward. That does work. And the evidence is just overwhelming that when you have a happy, healthy workforce, that workforce will do their best work. And that's really what the objective is for every organization and every leader.
Well, I think we can all say amen to that. So Laura Putnam, CEO of Motion Infusion, thanks so much for being with me today. I enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Carol.